Millionaire Charles Morrison sat at Malibu's most exclusive restaurant, laughing cruelly as he humiliated his waitress in Dutch, mocking her intelligence, betting $100 he could make her cry before dessert, calling her riffraff, who probably didn't finish high school. His Dutch business partners laughed nervously. Charles felt safe behind the language barrier, superior in his $10,000 suit. Then the waitress, Emily Harper, straightened her posture and responded, in perfect Dutch. Not just fluent, but with a Leiden accent that revealed elite education. She calmly listed his financial crimes: money laundering, offshore accounts, specific dates and dollar amounts. She mentioned his wife who knew about the affairs. Then, with the same calm she used to recite daily specials, she revealed the truth that made his face go white. "I'm the daughter you abandoned 20 years ago." Through the restaurant windows, FBI vehicles were already climbing the coastal road. Emily had spent 3 years working invisibly in her father's favorite restaurant, gathering evidence, recording conversations, waiting for this exact moment. She has 2 master's degrees, speaks 7 languages, and just destroyed a $300 million empire with the truth. This is the story of the invisible waitress who became her father's judge, jury, and executioner. What city are you watching this video from and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. Malibu Coast, California, at the most exclusive restaurant in Beverly Hills. Millionaire Charles Morrison was laughing while humiliating the waitress in Dutch in front of his business partners, believing she didn't understand. He didn't know that Emily Harper spoke 7 languages, didn't know she had 2 master's degrees, and above all, didn't know she was the daughter he had abandoned 20 years ago. When she responded in perfect Dutch, revealing his financial crimes and her identity, the color disappeared from the face of the most powerful man in Southern California. In 30 seconds, an empire built on lies and abandonment began to crumble. This is the story of how an invisible waitress destroyed her father with the truth. The Vista restaurant crowned the cliffs of Malibu like a jewel set, between the sky and the Pacific Ocean. It was the type of establishment where real estate, magnates and Hollywood elite closed million-dollar deals while savoring dishes that cost more than a working family's monthly salary. Its terraced decks offered breathtaking views, the ocean extending toward the horizon, dotted with yachts that looked like collectors' toys. Emily Harper knew every corner of that paradise of the privileged. 3 years of impeccable service had converted her into part of the decor, always present but never truly seen. Customers noticed her as much as they noticed the designer furniture. Functional objects for their comfort. Nothing more. It was exactly what she had planned. At 32 years old, Emily had perfected the art of social invisibility. Brown hair always pulled back in an austere bun that added years to her young face. Minimal makeup that hid the beauty inherited from her mother. Measured, silent movements of someone who had learned that standing out in her world only brought problems. None of the diners she served would have imagined that this silent waitress possessed 2 master's degrees with honors. International economics from Stanford, translation and interpretation from Columbia University. No one suspected she spoke 7 languages fluently, that she had read more books than they would ever own in their decorative libraries. But above all, no one would have connected this woman in the shadows with the Morrison surname. That Friday in September began like so many others. The California sun bathed the linen tablecloths in gold, the scent of jasmine from the garden mixed with the salty ocean breeze. Emily was checking the table arrangements when the maître d' approached with the reservation book. He was a distinguished 60-year-old man, one of the few who treated her with genuine respect, perhaps intuiting there was more to her than met the eye. The name jumped from the page like a slap. Charles Morrison, table for 6, business lunch with Dutch investors from the Vandenberg Group. Emily's hands remained perfectly steady as she continued folding the linen napkins. Years of preparation had trained her for this moment. She knew sooner or later it would happen. The Vista was the restaurant where Charles Morrison had taken Catherine Harper on their first date 35 years ago, where he had promised her the world looking at that same ocean, where he had sworn eternal love with the same ease with which he later betrayed her. The vanity of men like her father was as predictable as the tides. They would always return to the places of their first triumphs like criminals revisiting the scene of the crime. Emily had bet on this weakness and had won. When Charles Morrison entered the restaurant at 2 o'clock sharp, time seemed to slow down. Emily observed him from her position near the kitchen, studying the man who had fathered her and then erased her from his life like an accounting error. At 55 years old, Charles Morrison was the very image of American success. Tall, still athletic thanks to personal trainers and discreet cosmetic interventions. His hair, which should be gray, maintained an unnatural black that betrayed expensive treatments. His $10,000 tailored suit from Beverly Hills fell perfectly over his shoulders. The gold Patek Philippe on his wrist caught the light as he gestured. But it was the eyes Emily studied most intensely. Those green eyes he had transmitted to her. Cold as emeralds and empty as bottomless wells. 3 men in equally expensive suits followed him, clearly Northern European by their bearing and complexion. They laughed at Charles's jokes with that forced laughter of those who know their financial future depends on the host's mood. The group was escorted to the best table, the one in the corner of the main terrace with panoramic views. Emily waited for the precise moment, then approached with the silver tray and menus bound in leather. Charles didn't even look up. To him, she was part of the furniture. His voice, when he spoke, had that tone of casual command of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. He ordered the most expensive wine on the menu without consulting his guests. A Screaming Eagle Cabernet from 2000 that cost $3,000 a bottle, a gesture of power more than hospitality. It was while serving the appetizers that the cruel show began. Charles, evidently bored with financial conversation, decided to entertain his guests at the waitress's expense. He switched to Dutch with the fluency of someone who studied in Rotterdam, believing himself safe behind the language barrier. His voice adopted that tone of amused superiority Emily remembered from her childhood when he talked about the riffraff with his partners. He began commenting on her appearance, speculating out loud about her private life, inventing humiliating stories to make the Dutch laugh. He said she probably hadn't finished high school, that women like her existed only to serve men like them. He bet $100 he could make her cry before dessert. The Dutch laughed nervously, some visibly uncomfortable. John Vandenberg, the oldest, tried to redirect the conversation toward business, but Charles was launched. The alcohol from the expensive wine amplified his natural cruelty. He told how he would buy the restaurant just to fire all the staff, starting precisely with that stupid waitress who probably can't even read. That's when it happened. Emily delicately placed the wine bottle on the table, straightened with the grace of a dancer, and responded in Dutch. Not scholastic or halting Dutch, but the perfect Dutch of someone who lived in Amsterdam, with a Leiden accent that betrayed higher education. The words came out like silk knives, each syllable calibrated for maximum impact. She revealed that she knew about the money laundering through shell companies in the Dutch Caribbean. She mentioned dates, figures, names of accounts in the Cayman Islands. She spoke of Charles's wife, who knew about the affairs with the secretary. And then, with the same calm with which one announces the daily menu, she added that she was the daughter he had abandoned 20 years ago. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ocean breeze seemed to stop. Charles Morrison, the man who had negotiated with senators and intimidated judges, seemed to have turned into a pillar of salt. His color went from the red of shame to the cadaverous white of terror in seconds. His hands, always so firm while signing financial death sentences, trembled visibly. The Dutch looked at each other with expressions that passed from confusion to alarm. Vandenberg was the first to react, rising slowly from his chair as if facing an unexploded bomb. Emily maintained her professional smile, that same smile she had perfected in 3 years of silent humiliations. But her eyes, those green eyes identical to her father's, burned with a fire that had been latent for 2 decades. Through the restaurant's large windows, the first police cars could be glimpsed climbing the winding road toward the Vista. It wasn't chance. It wasn't luck. It was the result of 3 years of meticulous planning, of sleepless nights gathering evidence, of pain transformed into impeccable strategy. The FBI's Economic Crimes Unit had been waiting for her signal. Emily had recorded every conversation, documented every transaction, photographed every document during 3 years of patient waiting. The file she had delivered to the U.S. Attorney's office was so complete that even the most expensive lawyers in Los Angeles couldn't save him. The FBI never arrives by chance at places like the Vista, when the black SUVs stopped in front of the restaurant entrance. Every table had already understood they were about to witness a spectacle that would feed high society gossip for years. Special. Agent Rodriguez entered with the authority of someone who knows he has all the winning cards. He was a 50-year-old man who had dedicated his life to hunting white-collar criminals, one of those public servants who couldn't be bought. His eyes immediately settled on the corner table where Charles Morrison seemed to have shrunk 3 sizes. The Dutch were already standing, gathering documents and phones with the haste of those who want to dissociate from an imminent catastrophe. Vandenberg whispered something agitated in Dutch to his colleagues, and Emily caught the words fraud and immediate exit. They didn't need translation to understand that the $50 million deal had died before being born. Charles tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support him. For the first time in 20 years, he truly looked at his daughter, not at the waitress, not at the obstacle to his comfort, but at Emily. Catherine's features were all there. The curve of the nose, the arch of the eyebrows, that dimple on the chin that appeared only when she was serious. How had he failed to see her for 3 years? Special Agent Rodriguez approached with studied calm. In his career, he had arrested politicians, businessmen, even a bishop. But this case had something special. The story of the daughter who traps the father had moved even his hardened heart. The arrest was executed with theatrical precision. The charges read aloud resonated in the silent restaurant. Tax evasion for $300 million, bribery, falsification of business documents, money laundering. Each charge was a nail in the Morrison Empire's coffin. As the agents handcuffed Charles, he stared at Emily with a mixture of horror and something that resembled respect. The girl he had considered a youthful mistake had played him like an amateur. She had waited, planned, and struck with a sniper's precision. The restaurant emptied quickly. The rich have a sixth sense for scandals and know when it's time to disappear. Only the owner, Mr. Antonio Ruiz, remained watching from the kitchen door with an indecipherable expression. When they were alone, Emily slowly removed her apron. Her hands didn't tremble. She had imagined this moment so many times that reality seemed almost a disappointment. Where was the satisfaction? Where was the joy of revenge? Mr. Ruiz approached with 2 glasses of California brandy. He was a man who had seen much in his life, who had served senators and mobsters, saints and sinners. He knew the weight of untold stories. The elderly owner revealed he had always known who Emily was. Her mother, Catherine, often came to the restaurant after the abandonment. She would sit precisely at that corner table and look at the ocean, crying silently. She talked about the brilliant daughter who would change the world, about the girl Charles had discarded like trash. Mr. Ruiz had hired Emily 3 years ago, not out of pity, but for justice. He knew that one day Charles would return, drawn like a moth to the flame of his glorious past, and he knew Emily had the right to confront him. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more official vehicles. The IRS, the U.S. Attorney's Office, everyone wanted their piece of the feast. The Morrison Empire, built on foundations of corruption and bribes, was crumbling in real time. The following weeks transformed Emily into the most sought-after woman by American media. The vigilante waitress, the tabloids called her. The angel of justice, the serious newspapers titled. But she rejected every interview, every book or movie offer about her story. She didn't want fame. She had only wanted justice. She moved to San Francisco, to a modest apartment in the Mission District that smelled of history and normalcy. There, far from the spotlight, she began processing 20 years of frozen pain. The nights were the worst, when memories returned like tides. Her mother crying behind closed doors, unpaid bills, schoolmates who mocked her secondhand clothes while her father appeared on television in $1,000 suits. It was during one of those sleepless nights that she received an unexpected visit. Hope Morrison, Charles's sister whom no one knew existed, showed up at her door. She was an elegant woman in her simplicity, with gray hair worn with pride and eyes that had seen too much. Hope told a story the newspapers didn't know. how Charles had betrayed the entire family for success, how he had stolen grandmother's inheritance, falsified documents, destroyed anyone who got in his way. She revealed having sent anonymous money to Catherine for years, trying to repair in small part the wrong done by her brother. She handed Emily documents proving her right to grandmother's inheritance, clean money Charles had hidden for 30 years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to start over, to build something good from the ashes of destruction. The trial began 3 months later at the federal court in Los Angeles. The courthouse was besieged by journalists from across the country. The story had captured public imagination, the corrupt millionaire and the abandoned daughter, hubris and nemesis, a drama worthy of Greek tragedy. Emily testified for 3 days. Her voice remained firm as she recounted not only the financial crimes but the abandonment, the cruelty, the destroyed lives. She described her mother dying while calling the name of the man who had destroyed her, still in love after all the suffering. Charles, in the defendant's dock, seemed to have aged 20 years. His dyed hair had grown gray at the roots, his face marked by the reality of his fall. When their eyes met during a recess, Emily saw something she didn't expect: remorse. True, deep remorse. But it was too late for forgiveness. The courtroom was filled with other victims of Charles Morrison. Ruined small business owners, families destroyed by his real estate maneuvers, workers fired without compensation. All had come to see the man fall who had built his fortune on their broken backs. The sentence came as expected. 20 years for Charles Morrison, seizure of all assets. The end of an empire built on others' pain. But for Emily, the true victory came afterward. With grandmother's inheritance and donations from honest business people, she founded the Harper Foundation for Victims of Economic Violence. It wasn't just a charitable organization, but a rebirth center for families destroyed by men like her father. The foundation's office was the antithesis of Charles's empire: bright, open, full of plants and photos of rebuilt families. Each morning, Emily arrived before everyone, prepared coffee, and read letters from those seeking help. They were stories she knew well. Abandoned wives without resources, forgotten children, families destroyed by greed. One morning, she received a visit that shook her profoundly. Lucy, the young secretary everyone believed was Charles's mistress, showed up with a baby in her arms. The truth was different and worse. Charles had harassed her, blackmailed her, threatened her when she rejected his advances. He had fired her and destroyed her professionally out of revenge. Emily hired Lucy immediately. Together, they began gathering other victims of Charles Morrison. There were dozens, then hundreds, investors robbed of their patents, small business owners crushed, families ruined by defective construction. Charles's empire was built on a graveyard of broken dreams. The foundation became a beacon of hope. In 1 year, it had helped more than 500 families. Emily discovered that transforming pain into help for others was the only true revenge against men like her father. One day, while reviewing new cases, she received a visit from Jan Vandenberg. The Dutchman had followed the trial and the foundation's birth from Amsterdam. He came with a proposal. He wanted to invest in the foundation, create a European network of support for victims of financial crimes. The man had learned his lesson. The near deal with Charles had awakened him. Now he only invested in ethical projects, slept better, and had even learned English better to no longer hide behind languages. His collaboration took the foundation to an international level. 2 years after the arrest, Emily received a letter from the Federal Correctional Institution. Charles's trembling handwriting filled pages of confessions and regrets. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He knew he didn't deserve it. But he wanted her to know the truth about some things. He revealed he had followed her life from afar, that he knew about her master's degrees, her successes, that pride had always fought with remorse, but pride had always won. He confessed having cried when he learned of Catherine's death, but having been too cowardly to show up at the funeral. The letter also contained information about hidden accounts in Switzerland and offshore havens, not for him, but for his victims. Codes, passwords, locations of safety deposit boxes. It was his pathetic offering of redemption, the only way he knew to say sorry through money. Emily used that information to recover another $100 million, all distributed to victims through the foundation. But she never responded to the letter. Some distances can't be bridged with words. The foundation grew exponentially. They opened offices in New York, Chicago, Miami. Each city had its Charles Morrisons, its empires built on others' misery. Emily traveled constantly giving lectures, pushing for stricter laws, being the voice of the voiceless. On one of those trips to New York, she met Michael Sanders, a lawyer who had dedicated his career to fighting corporate corruption. He had followed the Morrison case from the beginning, admiring Emily's courage. They began working together, and slowly professional admiration transformed into something deeper. Michael was everything Charles never was: honest, humble, dedicated to justice more than money. With him, Emily learned that not all men were like her father, that love could exist without betrayal, that one could build without destroying. The call came one spring morning, 3 years after the arrest. Charles Morrison had died in prison, heart attack while sleeping, alone as he had lived the last years. The prison director said that in recent times he only talked about his daughter and his wife, as if living more in the past than the present. The inheritance Charles left surprised everyone. Everything to Emily and the foundation, with one clause: she must personally come to collect a box he had sealed years before. The box contained the past Emily had tried to forget. Hundreds of photos of the family they were: her as a child at county fairs, Catherine young and radiant, Charles who seemed genuinely happy. And letters. So many letters Charles had written but never sent, dated throughout all 20 years of absence. In those letters was the other Charles, the one who fought with himself, who started to return 1,000 times but always stopped. There was the man who had chosen empire over family and spent the rest of his life paying the price. The last letter, written the day before he died, contained only one sentence: "Forgive me for teaching you that love has a price. It doesn't. It's the only thing that can't be bought." Emily cried for the first time in years, not for the man Charles had been, but for the man he could have been, for the father who chose wrong and dragged everyone into the abyss with him. The funeral was private at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Los Angeles. Only Emily, Hope, and surprisingly Lucy, with other former employees Charles had destroyed, attended. They didn't come for him but for Emily, to close a chapter. As the coffin descended into the California earth, Emily thought of her mother, how she would have forgiven Charles even this. Catherine had loved until the end, while she had chosen justice. She didn't know which path was correct, only knew each must choose their own. 1 year later, Emily married Michael in an intimate ceremony in San Francisco, not in a cathedral, but in the small church where her mother prayed after the abandonment. The foundation was her true legacy, but love with Michael was her personal redemption, proof that one could love without destroying. The foundation today is one of the most important in America. It has helped thousands of families, created stricter laws against financial crimes, given voice to those who had none. Emily's office has 2 photos on the desk, one of Catherine smiling at the beach, another of their family as it was before Charles chose empire. The Vista still shines over the Malibu cliffs. Mr. Ruiz died last year, leaving the restaurant to Emily. She doesn't work there, but from time to time she goes to sit at that corner table where everything began and ended. She looks at the ocean and thinks about how the waves take everything away. Pain, rage, remorse, leaving only the naked truth of our humanity. The new waiters know the story of the colleague who brought down an empire. When a customer misbehaves, the new manager, a young man Emily saved from fraudulent bankruptcy, smiles and says the phrase that has become legend: "Be careful how you treat those who serve you. You never know who you're dealing with." Charles Morrison died alone and forgotten. Emily Harper lives surrounded by the love of thousands of people she has helped. This was her true revenge, transforming poison into medicine, pain into hope, abandonment into welcome, and somewhere, perhaps a father and mother look at their daughter and understand that true love isn't measured by what we take, but by what we give. Charles's empire is dust. Emily's legacy will live for generations. The last page of Emily's journal, written the day of her father's funeral, contained only one sentence. Dad, I forgive you, not for you, but for me, because hatred is a prison and I choose to be free. Your moment of reflection. Give it a like if you believe justice always arrives, even if late. Comment what moment impacted you most. Share with someone who should know that true power isn't in money, but in the courage to face the truth. Subscribe for more stories that demonstrate how one person's courage can change the destiny of many. Because in the end, true empires aren't built on foundations of greed, but on acts of justice and compassion. And invisible waitresses sometimes see more than kings on their golden thrones.